Greetings, boos and ghouls. Tonight I've dug up a divinity delight, Dr. David Bad One, with a grave new take on tales from the crypt and theology. Lock up your tombs and clutch your crucifixes. This chat's a real scream. Everybody, the leaves are changing color. They're following. There's a crispness in the air. So that, of course, means that the ancient curse has been broken. David Goodin has risen from his tomb once again.
It's becoming a Halloween tradition, isn't it?
It is, yeah. This is the third or fourth. As you probably guessed from my very poor imitation of the Crypt Keeper at the beginning, we're talking about Tales from the Crypt and Theology and the paper that David Goodin has written on the topic. Dr. Goodin, thanks so much for joining us. And I'm going to launch right in for those who unfortunately are not familiar with this property that's now been around for 70 years. Is incredibly influential. I guess I have three questions, which is, what is Tales from the Crypt? Who is the Crypt Keeper? And what is your paper on this topic and related to theology?
Glorious is Tales from the Crypt. If you search for this, you must be a fan. Anyone who hears that voice, hear Danny Elfman's theme music that set off the HBO series, is instantly raptured back in time to the 1990s and filled with a childlike glee that nothing else quite speaks to anymore. Or I may be talking from personal experience. You figure it out. Tales from the Crypt has an incredibly long history, dating back to the 1950s. So, yeah, that's been a minute. It's been a minute. How much of that history you want me to get? I guess let's get into it. You just interrupt me whenever.
Yeah.
Kind of anticipating future questions. It's kind of the story of a rebellious son. There was a comic called EC Comics. It was educational comics. It was Bible stories. It was picture book Bible stories for kiddies. Hello, kiddies, to teach them all about the Bible from the father, Max Gaines. And he built up this mildly successful company for picture book Bibles and other educational things. How do you get kids to read? Add lots of pictures. That sort of deal. Yeah, the son didn't care. And then the son inherits the company in 1950 and discovers not making any money and talks to the illustrator and says, what would you guys like to write about? Something that's not this. And so they go into one most famously for horror, Vault of Terror, Tales from the Crypt, and another one that launches the company and eventually gets congressional attention. So a rebellious son, defiance against dad, wanting to make money, not really interested in Bible stories because no one's buying those. Let's give the kiddies what they want, and they want something to creep out their little sisters with. And hence EC Comics as entertainment comics was born. So secondly, you asked about the Crypt Keeper.
Yes.
The original, it's like which flavor of chicken you like, original, extra crispy. Extra crispy is the 1990s with a familiar one, the desiccated ghoul, who you were giving the puns of earlier, the most familiar image. Originally, he was just a creepy dude. He had kind of long hair, kind of looked weird, something you would take your kid and hug them closely and move to the other side of the street if you see approaching. It was nothing really special. 1970s, there was a movie, Tales from the Crypt, which had like a distinguished English actor, Sir Somebody, playing the Crypt Keeper, is just a distinguished fellow. Really no personality, just kind of as a vehicle to introduce and close out each volume. I would say the 1990s iteration is the true Crypt Keeper, who delights us with his laugh. And what was the third question? Am I interested in my paper?
Yes.
Well, it's for a volume. I'm not the editor of this volume. I'm just a contributor. The editor hasn't said if it's going in the volume yet, so there's always that possibility. Talking about jinxes at the start of this program, calling them down. I may jinx myself by doing this podcast, saying, yeah, this is totally going to be in this volume about popular culture theology in the 1990s, because of course it is. Maybe it won't be. I'll publish it just on my academia.edu page as a draft, if not. But a huge part of my academic exploration has been popular culture and theology. It's just so much fun to write about.
Yeah.
And it is where most people encounter the subject of theology. Who has had formal catechesis? Who has had formal training academically in theology? No, you pick it up from popular culture, from TV shows, from things you've seen, things you pick up ambiently. And popular culture is enriched by theology because it's instant backstory. Litter your dramas with references to Adam and Eve, and you suddenly have narrative depth. It's kind of a cheat code. So I want to write in the popular culture theology series, say, what's the actual theology behind this? What are our popular conceptions of evil, of the devil, and his motivations? And what does the actual writers throughout history have to say about these subjects? I think it's inherently interesting. Feel free to disagree with me and never buy any of my stuff. But that is my interest in the subject. How do you take the Crypt Keeper and make it talk to theology? Hence, my paper was born.
Yeah. So the TV series is what you mostly discuss in your paper, which was, as you said, a
Correct.
1990s adaptation. It ran for almost 100 episodes. Each episode is an adaptation of a story from one of the 1950s comics. And the biggest stars in all of Hollywood were both behind the camera and in front of the camera. It was a real passion of love for the producers, who were some of the biggest names in Hollywood, because they grew up with this stuff. And I think both their big names, as well as perhaps the actors and directors' own love of this material from when they were kids, really brought them in. So it's really amazing stuff to go back and watch. And I was really excited to talk to you about this paper. I was really excited when you told me that you had it, because I'm a 90s kid myself. I was a comic book collector. I loved the Tales of the Crypt and EC comics, which were all being reprinted at that time due to the popularity of the TV series. I didn't have HBO. I lived in rural Canada. This was before you could get all content from the internet. So, I tracked down the handful of VHS releases. They didn't put out the whole series on VHS.
Wow.
Watched Tales from the Crypt Keeper. The
Oh, the Canadian cartoon version too? Oh my
yeah,
God. That is something else. Yes.
the many tributes like Creepshow 2, Tales from the
Yes.
Dark Side. So this is material that's very close to my heart. Uh, I think to start, kind of talking about theology, morality, ethics. What if you're not familiar with Tales from the Crypt? What people might be surprised by is that huge moral panic that you mentioned. Like, this was a huge deal. They really thought that these comics were causing children to go out and become murderers, and it went all the way to Congress. They were grilling the owners of EC Comics, who had to get out of horror comics. And by the way, they started a little magazine called Mad. So that's how they kept themselves going when they had to stop publishing horror comics. But
Satire is protected speech.
yes, exactly. So I think what might surprise people who are not familiar with this property is that, would you say it's fair to call the stories moralistic? Sometimes even aggravatingly so. Now, you do, to skip ahead a bit, you do mention in your paper the bad guys always get punished, but sometimes the protagonists also descend into madness. Horrible things happen to them as well. But still, that's what always surprised me about the moral panic, right? Because when these are pretty grisly comics, but at the end of the day, yeah, what's your take on that?
You got to make an omelet, got to break some eggs, right?
Yeah.
So there's collateral damage. Part of the glee of Tales from the Crypt, both in the 90s version, the original comics, is episodic. I mean, it's an anthology, so they're self-contained little stories. The common thread is the Crypt Keeper, and they present something that must be tied up with a bow by the end of, the episode or the end of the comic. And so what you get there often is some sort of poetic justice at the very least. You live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword, and maybe a few bystanders too. It is rare you get episodes of the bad guy is punished. It's more that will happen, and you will get moralizing tales of, okay, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for other stuff, but mostly poetic justice of you got what you deserved. And sometimes I'll go, what's the modern idiom of, subverting expectations. Okay, even the good guys are going to die too, or wind up in a madhouse, and the Crypt Keeper is just going to laugh about it all. So they're, as a narrative device to make it nice, neat, and done, they're sort of just the narrative arc, beginning, a crisis, and some sort of resolution at the end. And poetic justice is the way to do that. As an example of poetic justice, because I don't know if I'm really fulfilling the answer without an example, season 1, episode 1, Tales from the Crypt, HBO. The Man Who Was Death is the title, or at least a close paraphrase of it. He's an executioner at a state prison and operating the electric chair. And he feels like he's doing justice. And he looks the prisoners dead in the eyes because you deserve a remorseless death because you're a killer. And then he throws a switch, and he thinks like he is God's Avenger. And then they suspend death penalty in the state, and he's unemployed. Mm-hmm. So he takes it upon himself to go out and start electrocuting people that he think are guilty, got let loose on technicalities, or, otherwise annoyed him. And then he gets caught. He's taken to trial. He's found guilty of murder for killing people. And then they revive the death penalty, and he's the first candidate back in the electric chair. And now he's no longer stoic and proud and arrogant. He's begging for his life, saying the governor's going to call, and the call never comes, and the switch is thrown. So he lived by the sword, died by the sword. Poetic justice. You were a coward at the end, and you thought you were so courageous throughout. That is, I think, a typical Tales from the Crypt story of comeuppance and justice in a poetic, twisty sort of way.
Yeah. So the name of the piece, which is a baller name, by the way, is The Crypt Keeper as God's Avenger in Tales from the Crypt. And you talk about St. Maximus the Confessor's idea that I think some people would find startling, surprising, shocking if they're not familiar with a lot of theology on his infernal majesty, which is that the devil is God's avenger. So delighting in punishment, well, unwittingly, not knowingly, perhaps, serving divine justice. So how does this, I guess, one, explain this idea to us? And then how does that lens help us interpret the Crypt Keeper's justice through brutality and his status as you phrase it with some intersecting nerd terminology, his lawful evil anti-hero status?
Yeah. Talking about cultural Rubicon to touch upon. What do you actually? Oh, lawful evil. Got it. He's not chaotic neutral. He's lawful evil. There's a little chaos in there. But Saint Maximus Confessor, 7th century figure, really important one. Fascinating moment in my own study of patristics, the writings of the church fathers and a few mothers thrown in, but still we keep the name patristics for reasons. Writes about many subjects, and he enters on a subject you think would be written about more. What's the devil get out of this? What's the devil doing? He's the bad guy, obviously the bad guy, but what is the devil's self-understanding? Only a few patristic sources I've come across even explore why the devil's doing what he's doing. Most people just assume he's just a bad guy, enjoys being a bad guy. Maximus has this conception of he's not actually God's avenger, but he thinks he's God's avenger, and God tolerates it. That the devil is angry and just plain old pissed off. He feels God has been unjust toward him. He used to be an angel, in fact, Lucifer, the morning star, the angel of light, and now he got demoted. Some of you may be familiar with the painting by Cabanal, the fallen angel, that shows Lucifer on the ground and covering up a tear and covering up his face and rising with wrath, or Milton's Paradise Lost, Awake, Arise, or Be Forever Fallen. The devil's angry and looking to lash out at somebody. And this is part of Maximus' position of basically the devil's going to befriend you, and then on Judgment Day and say, aha, I'm going to rat you out. This guy did all these bad things. I was there. Now punish him. Maximus is not the only one who says this. There's another guy called St. Mark the Monk, St. Mark the Ascetic, that says the devil wants to punish you basically out of envy. God loves human beings, and why should you love human beings and not angels? And so the devil's out to corrupt us, to tarnish us, to make us debase ourselves, and therefore have good company in hell because it's a little bit lonely. and also just for the gleeful joy of, I can't get back at God because that's literally the big boss fight that he's not going to win, but he can sure make our lives hell in the meantime, and he's going to do it because I'm going to break all of God's toys, and therefore, God, where's your paradise now? So paradise lost, maybe a little more to that meaning that Milton had either intended or not intended, that Satan's out to ruin our paradise by making sure not many saints are going to make it into it. The rest, but there's going to be standing room only in hell. That's the devil's revenge. In his own mind, he's kind of the prosecuting attorney.
Yeah.
That literally on Judgment Day, he's going to be the prosecutor and saying, "You, dude, you're lying. I was there. I was telling you to do this, but you totally did it." And he thinks, kind of in his confused way, that he's still an angel, still has responsibility, and he's useful to God in some way. And of course, this kind of fits into the book of Job, where Satan has audience with God. And God is debating, saying, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And it says, Job's not going to like you if you take away of his good stuff. God says, let's see. Patristic fathers occasionally do ponder on the psychology of the devil. And I thought that was a great framework of, what if you're a scholar and you want to write about this stuff, what is it the Crypt Keeper might symbolically represent? Or what would be its own psychology of why it's doing what it's doing, other than it really enjoys it? And could the Crypt Keeper make a candidate, a real world cultural candidate, for us understanding how Satan will be the prosecuting attorney while being your buddy your entire life? Here you have the endearing figure of the Crypt Keeper that always greets you very kindly, "Hello, kitties," and somehow is seductive. People love the Crypt Keeper. I'm sure many of your audience will have Crypt Keeper tattoos of, "I love the guy." So it's that juxtaposition, throw it together and see if it lines up and what surprising results may come out of the research. And this is what this book chapter attempts to do.
Most insists that demonic power, it's primarily suggestive, it's temptation rather than making them do something. It's in a way, it's storytelling, right? The devil, he comes and he whispers in your ear and tells you a delightful story. Now, you propose that the Crypt Keeper, he may corrupt through storytelling, like titillating our passions. What markers in the series suggest he's more archivist and instigator than direct agent, and why does this matter for audience ethics? And I think that this is a question that a lot of people who are interested in horror pop culture would probably grapple with. This is a very deep thing across the whole genre, but of course, this is specifically with the Tales for the Crypt.
Yeah, I don't always have the conclusion in mind. I think the best papers, you don't have a conclusion in mind as you start writing it. You're just processing as you do the research. And midway through the paper, I'm here, well, maybe I need to expand the analysis beyond the Crypt Keeper to why people like him, including myself. And is this a good thing? So part of that question comes out of what the at least Byzantine side of the church will talk about, is almost exclusively, but not entirely, the powers of evil in the world are not like dark magic. It's not a power. It's only the power of suggestion. It is the prompt. It is the 7 deadly sins, sometimes personified as an actual demon, but they're suggesting, hey, it'd be a good idea just to nap all day. What do you think, buddy? I'm here right there with you. So go with that. They actually don't do stuff. There are some writings that suggest evil actually has a physical presence, but it's unclear. Evagrius, one of the fathers of the monastic traditions, will talk about monks who are like on their own or in little communities must really not give into any power of suggestion that comes through their spiritual life, through prayer, through visions, through dreams, and will literally talk about elders of a monastery running down, chasing monks before they can throw themselves off the cliff because an angel told them they could fly. So the patristic father's like, dude, no, if the devil says you can fly because you're an angel now because you just got promoted, it's probably a demon that told you that. But Egregious will say there's other monks that are so beautiful in prayer, and the demons get so mad they'll like literally mess with you. They'll take your prayer blanket that you're sitting on and toss you up in the air like a beach ball, literally in the writings of Evagrius. But the monk will not break his concentration. So the demons have like some physical power to do stuff. And then other, like one more vision from Evagrius, another monk while praying had like a snake coiled around him, was taking bites out of his flesh. So maybe more like a reptile than literally a snake. And the monk refused to break prayer. Was that a hallucination or was he really bitten? Evagrius won't reveal. But the overall impression is demons basically give you bad advice. Remember, reminds me of a Saturday Night Live skit where, was it R. Kelly was being accused. He says, everyone's comparing me to the devil, and you can't have one nice thing to say about the devil. Has horns, gives great advice. Yeah, good. Yeah, that's a good description of R. Kelly. Yeah, the devil is, Mr. Bad Advice who wants you to do stupid things. Now you're supposed to self-identify with stupid things you've done because you thought it would be fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think the second part of the question is, okay, what about in the personal experience? Why do we love this stuff so much? Hello, my name's Dave. I love the show so much. And that's where the chapter gets maybe a little weak of I would like to think type of things. I would like to think it's healthy to watch horror because reasons. Some of those reasons are great acting, great storytelling, catharsis. I mentioned of you deal with fear in your life. You got to talk to the boss. You got to deal with other things. You need a vehicle to hover under the blanket and deal with this. And suddenly the boss is not as scary as the alien coming after you in Alien Earth. And so it's good to get it all out, your fears. And so the real world is less scary. But the real world is pretty scary, and hence horror's there as a relief valve. One of my notes to you, and you kind of mentioned, is last year on the episode about Wes Craven, Wes Craven was actually a professor at one time. During the Vietnam War, he noted any student he would fail would have to go to Vietnam and die. So really messed with his mind of, what am I actually doing as a professor? None of these kids want to be here. They just don't want to die in Vietnam. And he goes on to be a horror director because the real horror is the stuff we pretend doesn't exist. How we are actually traumatizing children by the real world. And it's not your comic book. It's not your video game. It's not your music. It's actually the world itself is terrible. Turn on news. See if I'm wrong here. Yeah, you don't have anything to say back because the world is terrible. So horror is an escapism from that. And dealing with at least the emotions that are pent up, that they become toxic. So ultimately, I believe, rightfully or not, probably not, horror's overall positive. But if I can ramble on a little bit more,
Please.
The actual answer is it depends.
Yeah.
Of what exactly do you find entertaining about it? Like the congressional hearings. There's always congressional hearings, whether it's about Tipper Gore and music, or back in the 50s about comic books teaching juvenile delinquency, and illiteracy for some reason. I guess comic books, you don't have to read very much for them. What is the obscenity? It's, if we look at art as such, one of my favorite pieces of art here, I'm looking at notes, it's pretty obvious. Andre Serrano did a photograph that is objectively beautiful. It is a crucifix, Jesus on the cross, bathed in a beautiful golden light like a halo, surrealistic, kind of not quite in focus, surrounded by glowing bubbles of things like this. It's truly a beautiful piece of art. But it's a crucifix in a bucket of urine with a light shining through it. And they would have congressional hearings about this art, and you get the defunding of the National Institutes of Art, and current things are happening today because why is public money used to fund this? And Serrano pointing out, Jesus actually said it's not what comes out of your body that defiles you, but what comes out of your mouth. His art was the audience reaction. It's a beautiful piece of art, but people hitting the wall over, that you put a crucifix and a bucket of urine, well, if God's grace is good enough for me or you, it's like, what is defiling about our bodily processes? It's not what comes out of your body, what comes out of your mouth. And fast forward to last 10 years or so, Serrano was invited to the Vatican and was blessed by the Pope. He says, I know what you're doing, and it's fine. So true art is in the reaction. And so when you see Tales from the Crypt, you bring yourself to it. And if you see it as just beautiful storytelling and stress relief, that's probably very healthy. But if you see it as a perverse fantasy of, ooh, that guy, I hate these people and I want them to suffer, I want them to seem cruel, and yeah, let's make it bloody, let's make it gore-tastic, that might not be the healthiest way to look at this. And so which part of your soul are you feeding through this entertainment is probably the question of whether or not it's emotionally healthy for you to participate in it and to indulge those parts of you that vicariously enjoy it and secretly want to do it, and then maybe take the step to actually try to do terrible things because you're so angry at the world that is so cruel and unfair. So I think like the determining markers, the litmus test is the person's own self. Is it healthy for you to look at it? Does the piss Christ of Serrano offend you? Then stop looking at it and stop going to Congress about it and defunding National Institute of Arts and examine, why don't you understand what Jesus said? And because there's another way to look at this. So I guess like any art invites multiple perspectives, but multiple perspectives also in one's own self and one's own reaction. Why is this offensive to you? Because maybe it's not really offensive as such. It is something about your own bigotries and hatreds and biases that cause you to have such a strong reaction. I was never offended by the piss Christ. I mean, it was just like, I thought look it up, Google it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And again, as a 90s kid, I'm really glad that you brought up Piss Christ. I've been looking for some excuse to talk about it because it was so misunderstood, right?
Yeah.
Because it is, in fact, a very deep theological piece. You already explained it all. But if you are of our age or older, we won't mention that age, presented as an attack on Christianity. And there's a lot of cheesy art from people, the second year of art school, right? That's like, F you, mom and dad. I'm going to freak out the squares. And it's not that at all. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
clarifying. I'm really glad that we found an excuse to bring that up on the show. And
That
of course,
wasn't pre-planned. It's just I'm happy, thrilled you also know the piece and love the piece as well.
Yeah. Now, I realize I actually deleted a few lines because the next question, without any context, sounds like the rantings of a madman. And perhaps when I do completely lose my mind and I'm wandering the streets of Montreal in a cardboard box, this is what I'm going to come up to say to people. So, Dr. Goodin, is the Crypt Keeper closer to an Enochian scribe / watcher, a curator of forbidden lore, or to the revenant of Egyptian necromancy bent on vendetta? What theological stakes hang on that choice? And I think you're probably going to have to give us a little bit of context for that question.
Yeah. The Crypt Keeper himself. The comics gave him one of the episodes of the 90s HBO series called Lower Birth, like BERTH, as in storage area, but a lower generation of lower birth is implied. It's also in the comics themselves. In the comics themselves, you get the entire backstory. Traveling circus, just like in the HBO episode of the same name, with a freak show. Words they used at the time. Included an Egyptian mummy called Myrna. And so, ancient mummy entombed alive. And you go see this thing at the show. And they also had Enoch, which was the circus freak who had in the comic 2 heads, but in the HBO adaptation, 2 faces on the skull, one grotesque, one normal. And Enoch will fall in love with the mummy, and magically one night she comes alive. They escape together and they'll have a kid, and it's going to be old Crypty. And it's a wonderful love story, actually. It's like, he he's lonely, he's a freak, he falls in love with her, and she comes to life, and she wants love, and they have a beautiful baby together. And it's kind of this one case of a really sort of happy ending, but Crypt Keeper's kind of a little bit of both. He's, particularly in the 1990s adaptation, he's half desiccated mummy. He's literally kind of an undead creature. And he has kind of the horror, tragedy, comedy together in him. He is a horrific figure, but he's laughing all the time, not always laughing at the right things. So he's just a wonderful accident of bizarre circumstances that embodies something that somehow is relatable. But the comic itself gave his daddy's name Enoch. That's not a common name. Okay, all members of the audience named Enoch. Yeah, not many. It's not even a common name from the 1950s. It appears, scholarly guess that and 550 might get you a coffee at your local shop. It appears that some of these writers from picture stories from the Bible might have remembered a little bit of the Bible history. Enoch's a very conspicuous biblical figure. He's one of the few people to get special treatment, gets raptured into heaven. He's going to apparently learn things in heaven, return to earth, and write the books of Enoch, which are not canonical except for the Ethiopian and Eritrean churches. Everyone else, it's not your canon, meaning at best deuterocanonical or apocrypha, sometimes Protestant call it, meaning it's set aside for a reason. And the reason is what you're fascinated by becomes your focus. And why aren't you fascinated by the book of Acts? The book of Enoch's all about the devils, the demons, the watchers, and witchcraft, and fallen angels mating with human women to produce terrible offspring called the Nephilim, which is the current rage of all conspiracy theorists because apparently they built some pyramids. No, they didn't. But the book of Enoch's filled with forbidden lore, and it's kept out of most Bibles because I think we want you to memorize the book of Acts, not witchcraft and Nephilim and women and seduction. And, everyone's going for that stuff. So naming him Enoch, possessor of forbidden lore of dark realms, and also the parent of a woman who was entombed alive because she wouldn't be receptive to Pharaoh's sexual advances. So to punish her, he did this. So Crypt Keeper has, so I claim in my article, a vendetta against people who do evil and deserve comeuppance, together with forbidden lore and knowledge from his namesake, Enoch, the biblical, all about the bad guys and their powers and the things that they do. And so he's a little bit of this Janus figure, Two-Face, kind of literally, that is both after vengeance. He's evil, but he's got the lawful side of, the biblical side. So he's, what's the mad ramblings of Deacon John as a street preacher again? Which is Crypt Keeper more closely aligned with, the archivist of hell or an Egyptian mummy's vendetta against creeps of the world? I would say he's a little bit of both.
Yeah. You framed Tales from the Crypt within the 1990s anti-hero zeitgeist. So we had
Yes.
movies like Falling Down, Leon the Professional, Die Hard, where justice arrives via dubious means. Does that cultural mood reflect a deeper impatience with classical theodicy, like the quote-unquote crime doesn't pay and quote-unquote best of all possible worlds? And how does Tales from the Crypt exploit or critique that mood?
Yes. Emphatic yes. Theodicy is kind of like a thing. I'm going to be teaching a course on theodicy in January, online distance learning via Zoom. So
We'll link that up in the show notes,
link
folks.
that up.
So
Yeah.
take that course, and of course, you can also watch the. I'm doing the plugs already, but we did do a show of you on theodicy, and
Yeah.
David has been in a book on the topic where he solves the issue. It turned out it was really straightforward this whole time. So, anyways, please continue, Dr. Goodin.
So EC Comics, first educational comics, all about goody stuff. The whole thing about entertainment in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s was crime doesn't pay. They're all about when will they learn? Crime doesn't pay. And it's like good guys always win. in these classical Dick Tracy, The Shadow, various stories. There are some horror radio programs back in the day, but there seems to be this forefront message of inculcate society with a propaganda of obeying rules and authority because it always works out for the best. The congressional hearing in 1955 says all comics must adhere to this code. You can't question the authority. I actually have it here. I'll just read it to you. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority. Okay, Z Kyle, dude. Yeah, we're not going to do that. And it went out of business. Yeah, we're not going to publish that crap. So after 1940s, post World War II, yeah, we're living in a different world, and this world isn't quite just. After the baby boomers, when you're starting getting a little beyond that, 60s and 70s, 80s and 90s, you see a lot of anti-heroes come up. We start believing government is not your friend. They're not here to help you. Even Ronald Reagan said that government's not here to help you anymore. Now, cursed Ronald Reagan. So I think it does reveal a deep cynicism of everything is for the best and Leibniz sort of stuff. We're in the best of all possible worlds. It could be worse. Yeah, it still sucks. I don't care if the frying pan is better than the fire. I want neither. And if I can't get it from traditional means, I would like to see good guys wear black. I would like to see somebody who's using evil to fight evil, because good seems to be asleep on the job. So there's definitely, at the time, the 90s, and continuing, a sense of we need anti-heroes, heroes that are morally compromised in some way, doing something to get back at the things that are actually hurting us, which is sometimes government itself. And so you see Die Hard, or Leon, the killer who actually becomes a hero and saves a little girl's life, even to the point of self-sacrifice. And it's like it challenges us to question the world itself. And is it under a divine providence to assure the best of all possible worlds? It doesn't appear to be so. So theodicy is kind of the question, I would say, of if you are a person of faith, how do you reconcile why the world is the way it is? Mystery? Maybe we need to come up with better answers. My course of theodicy will explain that. But in the meantime, you have anti-heroes to lay down justice. And so Crypty is there to delight you with tales of comeuppance, or at least poetic justice. But not always. Some of his stories are just brutal and mean. But one that's kind of breaks the mold of poetic justice is perhaps the most famous episode, Yellow, with Kirk Douglas and one of his real life sons. And they're fighting World War I, and the son is a coward, and his cowardice gets people killed, and he's going to be court-martialed and shot by his own troops in order to keep morale and show there's discipline here. And his father tells his son, I will never let you die. Just pretend we're all going to have blanks, and you're going to show yourself proud. You're going to give a great speech, and you're going to make me proud, son. And son does that, and he's like, okay, I'm going to live. I just have to play dead. He gives a great speech. I'm doing this for the troops. I should have shown. It's like they're all real bullets. Kirk Douglas just murdered his son for his own pride. So there's no poetic justice there. It's more of a subversion of expectations that it hits you with. So the show is also fresh and entertaining because sometimes you don't know where it's going. And then it hits you with, oh, I didn't see that coming. That dad would be that evil to murder his own son for the sake of his own reputation as a general. Yeah. So something for everyone.
Yeah, as you said, there's a lot of this the poetic justice, but I think it's fair to say every episode has a twist ending, just about, right? So a lot of times,
yes.
I think that'd be fair to say for all of them. So you really don't see where they're coming, where they're going to end, and of course that's what's amazing, because if you don't know the show, if you don't know the comics, it sounds like it can get repetitive. But the other thing as well is that it being an anthology, even though it does have this format, it really does cover a wide range of genres within horror and thriller, right? So you don't know if you're going to get this very wrenching, dramatic story that you just told us, which is realistic, situated in the world that we live in, or you might get, vampires, and
Yeah.
you might get, the science fiction, whatever, aliens, right? So it's
Yes.
completely different each time. Okay, unfortunately, we should start wrapping up, but a question that we've addressed, but a wrap up question, something to bring it all together with a tidy bow, which is the Crypt Keeper's childlike glee and relentless puns sit atop a grisly retribution. How do humor camp and the quote unquote Greek masks of comedy tragedy, which you tie to his two faced father, function theologically? Do they disarm us? Do they disarm us for moral pedagogy, or do they seduce us into enjoying vengeance?
It's a great question because I can't give a full answer to that. Part of which, the whole tragedy, the Greek tradition, uh, our lives are a tragedy. If you read Plato in Symposium, the whole idea that there's the speech of Aristophanes in Symposium, there's a soulmate for you out there. You used to be joined together in one for heaven. You must find them. You probably won't find them. So the tragedy is there's someone out there out for you. It's just you can't find them. Our lives are tragedy. And what do you do with tragedy is sometimes you laugh about it. It's kind of a phenomenon of with trauma that some people handle it with humor. I mean, kind of a real life story. It's not funny. Maybe you'll find it funny, but it was funny in the weird way of the day my father died. How I learned about it is my sister in law came into the room laughing and said, "Guess what happened last night?" And she's laughing. "Your father died." And I went, basically made this face. And it's like, I just realized she couldn't handle the giving me the news.
Yeah.
So her way to break the tension was to laugh while she's telling me this. So there's a brokenness, and comedy often comes from pain, as people say. The whole thing about Joker with the Joaquin Phoenix depiction, he's laughing at everything because there's a brokenness within him, and therefore the stress relief just comes out of bubbling laughter, in a very unhealthy way. So comedy and tragedy are sometimes the same face, or at least the two faces on the same skull. Sometimes comedy is just the pun of, hello, boils and ghouls, that sort of deal. But sometimes comedy hides a deeper tragedy as well. The Crypt Keeper is a master of keeping it fun and light, even with a horror in the background. There's one episode he's talking about surfing. He says sometimes it's hard to hang 10, so I just hang one, and he shows a body just hanged. So, but that is at least a clever pun. But the unthought process of this, there's a deeper layer of where does comedy and tragedy intersect, and I think that disturbing place is where horror often occupies. There's many varieties of horror out there, from you know psychological thrillers to splatter fests to sadism, but the horror comedies that become really memorable kind of hit that place that doesn't quite have a definition and isn't resolved, where comedy and horror do connect in an uncomfortable way. You have to do something with it. Catharsis, I think, is what we do with it, but it can be disturbing.
I think that's the perfect place to end. We already did some hype for you, David, but let's just reiterate. So, we're going to link up David's course on Theodicy that will be running in the winter semester. It's remote, so you can take it. We're going to link up his past shows. We're going to link up his academia.edu. David, anything else you want to get out there?
Look forward to seeing you next year when I have something else that's Halloweeny.
I can't wait.
I have no idea what it'll be.
I look forward to going down to the cemetery with my shovel and 365 days from now, and digging you out for yet again another awesome interview. Thanks again
Sounds
for
good.
joining us.
Thanks for
Bye.
inviting me. Take care.